first just beats you down.
Yeah, sure does.
So realistically, we're doing average above average.
Yeah.
You just get told, no, it's what this is like.
No gloves, no mask, no social distance, nothing at all.
These factories in Leicester employ in clandestine conditions thousands of migrants and immigrants. They're undeclared, earn less than half the minimum wage, and many were forced to work.
Boohoo is one of Britain's most popular fast fashion retail brands, making an estimated £729.1 million in 2023, which is actually a decrease from the year before, if you can believe it. Just like other fast fashion retailers like Shien, they offer affordable, trendy clothes, particularly among young people between the ages of 16 to 30. They sell over 36,000 products. But just like its Chinese competitors, Boohoo has had its controversies over the years. Boohoo was founded in 2006 by Mahmoud Kamani and Carol Kane, both who had extensive experience with fashion, with Kumani's family running a wholesale textile business. In 2014, they focused on social media, using influencers and celebrities as tools to promote their products to their younger consumer base. This was the key to their success. Young people always love to buy what's trending, and Boohoo, collaborating with celebrities and using influencers, helped them to take a huge chunk out of the marketplace. And if you're wondering if one of the Kardashians collabed with them, of course one of them did, because every single one of them will collab to any fashion brand they can get their hands on. And in this case, it was Kourtney Kardashian. And of course, she wasn't the only celebrity to collab with Boohoo. Megan Fox is another, just to name a few. In 2016, they would go on to launch Boohoo Man, which is their manwear range, which of course was intended to reach a new consumer base of men aged 16 to 24, which opened up a whole new demographic of customers for them. Like other fast fashion brands, they released their own app in 2014, which would prove to be a huge success for them. Just like Shien, they offered clothes at a lower price compared to the high street markets, and they also included personalized suggestions as well as app-only discounts, which was an effective revenue source for Boohoo. Of course, their consumer base being 16 to 30, majority of which use phones more so than any other age group, it just made sense to have an app. Once the money began rolling in, they started to buy a lot of struggling retailer brands such as Pretty Little Thing, Karen Millen, Coast, Oasis and Warehouse, which helped them diversify into higher end markets, effectively buying up all the competition and taking over the market space. Boohoo also announced a record revenue during the pandemic with an estimated £1.23 billion in revenue, which is up 44% compared to 2019. It was almost the perfect storm for Boohoo because COVID forced people to shop more online and stay indoors, and Boohoo was the perfect source for cheap clothing with a huge selection that had basically just effectively made them a ridiculous amount of money. So much so that they would purchase Debenhams brand name and website for £55 million. They also opened a new office in Soho for a whopping £72 million, which housed around 600 employees, and also to accommodate the growth that they had over the last few years. So to say that they've done very well for themselves is a huge understatement. But all of this, of course, comes at a cost, because Boohoo are not as squeaky clean as they want us all to believe. And just like other fast fashion companies, Boohoo is just as guilty for the mistreatment of their staff, especially the factory workers that produce the clothes for the suppliers for Boohoo. And one such example was in Leicester, when in 2020 an undercover report done by the Sunday Times found that the warehouse workers were being paid as little as £3.50 an hour. And one of the reasons Boohoo actually did so well during the pandemic was because despite the lockdowns being on, they kept their factories running, and these factory workers were forced to work in cramped conditions without any spacing because it was more important to the factory that they made their money. The clothes made in this particular factory was under the brand name Nasty Gal label, which is actually owned by Boohoo. Now, a statement from Nasty Girl claimed that they do not allow any of its suppliers to pay less than the minimum wage and has a zero tolerance approach to instances of modern slavery. They also claim that they have terminated relationships with suppliers where evidence of non-compliance with their strict code of conduct is found. Now, Boohoo themselves said that they do not tolerate any incidents of non-compliance, especially in relation to the treatment of workers. By May 2021, Boohoo had consolidated its supplier factories to 67 from the initial 500, with hundreds of factories closing. Now, you could also argue that this, of course, wasn't good for the factory workers. It seems that instead of Boohoo actually regulating these policies properly, they just decided to consolidate so many factories, which meant so many people were just fired. A lot of the factory workers were forced to keep working even with the bad pay, and especially during COVID, because they would have found it incredibly difficult to find work in their factories, which just makes the whole thing so much worse. The other thing as well is that like the garment industry in Leicester relies primarily on the labour of South Asian women who were migrant workers, and it was effectively modern slavery. And a lot of these workers can't even speak English very well, so they're kind of trapped because they can't really do anything but take what is offered to them because they just don't have the ability to get jobs in other industries or possibly other factories because they can't even speak English very well. So they're just being completely exploited, and they're forced just to live paycheck to paycheck, in some cases using food banks just to survive. Because no worker, of course, should be ever paid $3.50 an hour. That is insanity. Now, of course, Boohoo will say it's awful and that they condemn it and they had no idea what was going on and blah, blah, blah.
What the fuck is this? I don't know.
Even with Boohoo's own policies against unfair pay and modern slavery, the reality is there's no accountability for it and there's no compliancy. So all these companies can come out and say like they're investigating and they don't tolerate this, but a lot of the time they only do it when they get caught, when a report is released and they're forced to make a statement. But you could easily argue that Boohoo could easily have known this stuff was happening and just decided to ignore it. A lot of people would assume that the mistreatment of workers, especially in factories, tends to happen more in other fast fashion companies like Shien or Temu, where they get all their supplies from China. So it is almost surprising for some, even for me, to hear that like even in the UK there's people that are forced to work under modern day slavery. But despite all of that, they are still very dominant in the marketplace and they're still making millions of pounds every year. Boohoo has been criticised for using culturally sensitive symbols or designs without proper context or credit to the cultures, with a lot of people accusing them of cultural appropriation. And there's also been claims that Boohoo have also underpaid their influencers, their freelancers, and their models who work on their campaigns. And some influencers have actually spoken out about the unrealistic work expectations during the collaborations. And Boohoo and its subsidiaries like Pretty Little Thing have also faced accusations of copying designs of independent artists and smaller brands without any sort of credit or compensation, which is a very common thing, it appears, in fast fashion industry. But another issue that Boohoo shares with its competitors as well is the environmental impact it has. Like Boohoo's ultra fast fashion approach means it releases hundreds of new styles weekly, which kind of encourages this wear it once culture, where the majority of Boohoo's garments are made from synthetic materials like polyester, which take hundreds of years to decompose. Much of this clothing, of course, is going to end up in a big landfill due to the short life cycle of them. And then the other issue, of course, is the textile dyeing, which is obviously a very water-intensive process where toxic chemicals are used and contaminate water supplies if it's not managed properly. Boohoo have launched initiatives like Ready for the Future, which is like a collection market that is more sustainable. However, a lot of experts actually argue that the efforts are minimal and actually fail to address the core problems of overproduction and resource insensitive manufacturing. So Boohoo's business model of ultra fast fashion fundamentally obviously conflicts with environmental sustainability. Personally, I was surprised to see how exploitive Boohoo are, especially to their supply chains, to their factory staff. And there's literally no excuse other than greed. Like if you're making hundreds of millions of pounds every year and you can't pay your factory workers at a minimal living wage, it's just pure greed. And it just goes to show, just like any other business that is extremely popular, especially in the fast fashion industry, they only get there through exploitation. And they will come out and they'll say all the things that they think they want us to hear and all the lies and all the bullshit. But at the end of the day, they're exploitive. They're taking advantage of people. And they're also manipulating the young people into buying stuff, into following trends, into constantly buying clothes that they don't need, especially at a time when we're all struggling to even pay our bills. And the question always is like, what can we do to help reduce this? I mean, the obvious one, which is what I've mentioned before, is of course you could boycott these kind of companies. Probably the best tool we have as consumers. And I know we're living in a world where consumerism is rampant, and hopefully someday we can relax a bit and realize that materialism isn't the way to go. And obviously, being a publicly traded company, Boohoo, they have shareholders, so they need to hit targets. Every year they need to make more and more. And although they're on a decline since last year, I don't imagine Boohoo are going anywhere anytime soon. But that's it, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Please like, share and subscribe as always if you enjoyed the video. Do you use Boohoo? Have you bought from Boohoo? Do you enjoy Boohoo? Do you think it's a good brand? Are you surprised by the controversies around them? Or is it just a cost of having a big business? Is that, you know, cognitive dissonance is a great thing for all of us? Let me know in the comments anyway down below what you think. And yeah, that's it. Thanks so much for watching as always. I will see you in the next video. Peace out.